Works and Dictators podcast on Global Player or the brand new LBC app. Well, coming up in the next hour, it's Monday's Cross Question. We have three newbies on the panel tonight. Alison Hume is Labour MP for Scarborough and Whitby. James Bloodworth is a journalist who's the author of the new book Lost Boys, Undercover Adventures in Toxic Masculinity. He'll tell us a bit about that. Andrew Gold, journalist and broadcaster, who's the presenter of the Interviews podcast Heretics. And Joe Gideon, campaigner, social commentator and former Conservative MP. The number to call 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number. You can text 84850 and watch us on Global Player or the LBC app.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the White House says President Trump will visit Central Texas on Friday after the devastating floods over the weekend. At least 91 people have died and dozens are missing. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt hit out at those who've criticised recent cuts to the National Weather Service.
Blaming President Trump for these floods is a depraved lie, and it serves no purpose during this time of national mourning. Here are the facts. Despite unprecedented rainfall, the National Weather Service executed timely and precise forecasts and warnings.
The names of 52 people who died in the July the 7th London bombings have been read out at a memorial service at St Paul's Cathedral. Events have been taking place across the capital to mark the 20th anniversary. The Foreign Secretary says a review will be carried out into the way the death of Harry Dunn was handled by the previous government. The 19-year-old motorcyclist died in a collision with American Anne Sakoulas in Northamptonshire in 2019. And authorities in Greece are imposing compulsory work breaks because of extreme heat. Those who do outdoor work and run food deliveries won't be allowed to do their job until 5 o'clock. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 16 points, 88.06. The pound buys $1.36 and €1.16. LBC weather, a few lingering showers in eastern England tonight, mainly clear and dry for most, a low of 5 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's Monday's Cross Question on LBC. On the panel today, to my left, Joe Gideon, campaigner, social commentator and former Conservative MP. Next to her, Andrew Gold, the presenter of the Interviews podcast Heretics. To my right, Alison Hume. I don't know if you've ever been called a heretic, but there's still time. Labour MP for Scarborough and Whitby. And next to her is James Bloodworth, journalist who's the author of the new book Lost Boys, Undercover Adventures in Toxic Masculinity. We'll hear a bit about that in a few minutes' time. The number to call if you'd like to put a question to our panel, 0345 6060 973. And of course you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, our first question is a text question from Scott in West Hampstead. On the 20th anniversary of the 7/7 terror attacks in London, is Britain any safer from the risk of further extremist attacks? If not, which further measures should the government, the security services and the police take to ensure that the country is much safer from... Sorry, I just got hiccups. is much safer from further terrorist attacks? Joe Gideon.
I think the short answer is no, we're not much safer. I don't think there's an easy answer to how we become safer. I mean, clearly, there is a lot of work that happens that we don't know about to keep the country safe. And I know for a fact that a large number of potential attacks have been stopped by our security services, having advanced intelligence. I wouldn't like to be in charge of the security service at this moment in time because it is a really tough job.
Do you think that the threat from Islamist terrorism is more heightened now than it even was then? Or do you think that the threats to this country come from predominantly other sources now?
Well, I think they're heightened by our involvement in Middle Eastern affairs, clearly. And That is a challenge, because I think we do have a very important diplomatic role to play on a global stage, and we shouldn't shy away from that involvement in Middle Eastern affairs. But clearly, people who don't subscribe to our worldview will see it as a betrayal of their values.
Andrew Gold.
I think the first thing is we've got to actually name the problem. I think you used the word Islamist, but I don't think the question did, and I'm not sure you said Islamist or Muslim. And I think that fear that we have to actually name what is going on. We're not talking about Tommy Robinson running around and blowing up a Manchester arena or something like that. So we have to get to grips with it, and we have to get to grips with what we have, which is a very liberal, which is good. I mean, I like that. We have this liberal atmosphere and liberal sensibilities of let's not blame any kinds of people. But this is an issue right now. You're absolutely right. There are issues with our involvement in the Middle East. Part of that is that in the Middle East, most Middle Eastern countries, 97 to 99% of people have unfavourable views of Jews. And most of our immigration, or at least a large bulk of it, comes from there. They don't get rid of their views at at Dover or wherever it might be. So I think we need to get to a point where we can tell people, like we used to, that belief systems, as though this was Scientology or extreme Jehovah's Witnesses or Hasidic Jews, if we had millions of them in this country, belief systems are okay for us to say, hey, I'm not sure about that. And I think our police services need to get to grips with that as well. And we all have to be quite firm on this. And sometimes you have to be a little bit more strong against intolerant people and views.
I think obviously people were horrified by the attacks in general, but I think what people found even more horrific was that these bombers all were born and brought up in Britain. They weren't people coming from Islamic countries and carrying out terrorist acts. They'd been part of our society for 16, 18, 20 years, however long it was.
Yeah, well, that makes it even worse, doesn't it? I mean, look, either their parents or their parents' parents came to this country. I understand that feeling of wanting to fit in, as a lot of those people will have felt, and then it's become a bit extreme. James is very good on radicalisation and extremism and those kinds of things, and it must feel very lonely and alienating at times to be part of some sort of minority. Right now, we've got millions and millions of people who belong to the Muslim faith here. And it's the fact that, as you say, it's often second generation, third generation people born here. We've tried to assimilate. We have these great schools like Michaela's school, Catherine Burble Singh's school, where she really tries, and then she is an enemy of the left. I don't really understand why that is. Anyone who tries to actually assimilate these people. As I say, if we had millions of people who were Scientologists, or even Scientologists born in this country, and they made up the bulk of terrorist attacks, I think people would be rightly up in arms. If it were the Hasidic Jews, would be rightly up in arms. So we have to name the problem before it's too late. Many people think it is too late, but we have to have honest conversation. The fact that I'm saying this now, 2 or 3 years ago, I wouldn't be able to say this on a radio show. They'd cut to a break. So I think people are starting to realise, I think
we did about 3 minutes ago.
I've just been talking to myself.
Yeah. Alison Hume.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that the first duty of a government is to keep its citizens safe, and so under a Labour government we are investing more in defence, 2.5 up to 5% over the next few years. It's really important to say that, but it's not just about planes and physical defence. What's changed is, as people have said, is that the threat from inside our country is so much harder to pinpoint since 20 years ago. It's people in rooms. It's lone wolves. It's people who maybe act on their own. And I think this is what's really upsetting people, is that it's a hydra-headed monster, and nobody quite knows where the next threat's coming from. I mean, our security services do an incredible job, and as Joe said, they stop things all the time that we can't talk about. We only hear about the terrible things that happen. And I think that one of the things as a government that's interesting is that we're looking at increasing living standards for people as part of the strategic defence. That sounds odd, but one of the things that...
It's amazing what counts as defence spending nowadays, isn't it?
I know, but if you think about it, Iain, seriously, if people don't have any money and they're isolated and they're cut off, this is all part of the problem. I think that we become, I'm sure, a more isolationist country, and I think that's part of the problem.
I mean, that kind of feeds into your narrative, I guess, in the work that you've been doing, James.
Yeah, and it's exactly right to say that many structural issues such as poverty and housing, they do feed into the isolation, which then can make people more susceptible to radicalisation. Also, like the loss of public spaces. So there are fewer public spaces. People have less disposable income, which you tend to need nowadays to socialise a lot more. So they're stuck in their bedroom, online, going down these rabbit holes, and that can feed radicalisation. I mean, I think I take issue with something Andrew said, actually. I think it's important to make a distinction between, very clear distinction between Islamists and those who carried out the atrocities on the 7th of July and ordinary Muslims. So the biggest poll that was taken following 7/7 showed that 95% of British Muslims unequivocally condemn what happened on that day in the attacks.
But 5% is still quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. And then we look at kind of the riots where there were people last year calling for hotels full of asylum seekers to be burnt down, and you had 20% of the population saying that was okay, supporting those actions. So I think it's complicated. And when we talk about something like assimilation and integration, which I do think is important, you can't on the one hand talk about integration and assimilation, then on the other hand make out that Muslims aren't really British. There's a big discourse at the moment in some elements of the right-wing media, people like Matthew Goodwin talking about people as if they're not really British unless they've got kind of ethnicity going back all the way multiple generations, whereas actually, like we need to encourage the idea that Muslims are British, just as British as people like me, first, second, third generation or whatever.
But what makes people British?
Well, citizenship. In this country, it's not. Our citizenship isn't based on ethnicity. It's based on, like, my partner's from Brazil. She has a British passport. She's as British as I am, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as citizenship in this country actually works.
Yeah. Okay. I get that. I feel like we have to deal with the reality, which is that statistic. Firstly, 5% don't mind or support the most abominable terrorist attack.
That wasn't what that said. It was 5% didn't unequivocally condemn it, but 95% did.
Well, 5%, as Iain points out, 5% of several million is an enormous number. That's insane.
And 20% last year supported people who were going out encouraging asylum seeker hotels to be burned down and blockading the doors.
Well,
and
I'd have to see how that was worded and what those stats were.
Well, yeah,
because we know right after that everybody was scared around the country about, oh no, there's going to be these right-wing movements, there's going to be right-wing people are going to meet up in all the city centres, and it didn't happen. So those of us like me who were saying we don't really have an organised far-right, we're going, well, obviously they didn't turn up because they just didn't turn up.
Apart from all the black people being pulled and Romanians being pulled out of cars and kicked on the floor and shouted, go home, get out of my country. People who are now in prison for doing that.
And can we remember why those riots actually started? Because of the false narrative that went out on the media that the perpetrator was somebody from another country.
Let's be clear, social media. It didn't go out on the mainstream media.
No, that's right, social media, and the facts were wrong, and in fact he was a citizen.
Well, he had an Al-Qaeda manual.
No, but sorry. But let's just go back to the original start of the conversation about how the danger. We're talking about terrorism, and for whatever reasons, it's homegrown.
I mean, he was born in Cardiff, I think. Yeah. So, I mean, he was a British citizen.
Well, this is why, as James points out, a contingency of the right, and I don't know that I would necessarily agree exactly with what they say, but this is why they say it is not enough to be born here to be British, because these are people who have allegiances to other countries and places. I made this point when you came on my podcast, Iain, because you talked about running for MP or something like that, I believe. Councillor, what was it?
Certainly not a councillor.
Sorry, I do apologise. But you were saying one of the most important things to you, as it is to me, is potentially banning kosher and halal meats, right? The way that they do it, it's barbaric. And you felt very much that was something you wanted to enact or implement, and you weren't able to do so because there was a large Jewish population. I'm a Jew myself. I'm not having a go, Oh,
this was going back to 2003 when I was sort of thinking about running in Chipping Barnet. Yeah.
But it's relevant because these are people, Jews, who are very good at assimilating. I would say better. I suppose it's a subjective measure in many respects, but better than many other minorities. And even so, so, even after many, many generations, you had to alter your politics to appease a group who might have had allegiances to something that is not essentially British. The Jewish population is 250,000. So again, we're talking about that compared to millions and millions of Muslims, 53% of which want homosexuality to be outlawed, 40% of whom want Sharia law to be enacted in our country.
That same poll that I mentioned, the biggest poll, you can look up, David Aronovich mentioned it today in a column as well. The biggest poll done after 7/7 found that, I think it was 86% of British Muslims felt British, and that was more than British people, the British population in general, including everyone else.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good to hear.
And I know whenever I've been on air on several occasions when there's been a terror attack and I've had to cover it live, and I always make a point of inviting Muslim callers to phone in, because I know if I was a Muslim and there was a Islamist-inspired terror attack, I know exactly how I would feel. I think, oh God, here we go again. And it's important that those voices are heard, because, as you say, so the overwhelming majority of people will feel exactly the same as anyone around this table. But, of course, there's that small minority that don't. Right, let's move on to something else. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
We have with us today Alison Hume, Labour MP for Scarborough and Whitby, Joe Gideon, former Conservative MP, Andrew Gold, presenter of the Heretics podcast, and James Bloodworth, journalist who's written a book called Lost Boys. Explain.
Yeah, so it's Lost Boys, a personal journey through the manosphere, which kind of is self-explanatory, I think.
And what is a lost boy? Is it a boy? I mean, I'll give you an example. My best friend's 8-year-old son stood up in the middle of his primary school class the other day and extolled the virtues of Andrew Tate, an 8-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you got to worry. Also, if they start calling themselves an alpha male at the dinner table, that's also
is that
when you
right?
got to worry. Yeah, I mean, it's just boys who've kind of fallen into the manosphere, male subcultures, anti-feminist subcultures, male supremacist subcultures, not just male subcultures, but
and how
real
does that
extreme end of
happen?
A variety of ways. Sometimes there's kind of pre-existing vulnerabilities, which then some of these masculinity demagogues prey on. Sometimes they radicalise them and create the feeling of insecurity. So Andrew Tate berates his audience like a drill sergeant, makes them feel like they're not enough, and then comes along and presents himself as kind of a saviour and guide who can fix them if they shell out £5,000 for one of his courses.
Because I've lost count of the people that I've met over the last couple I'd never heard of Andrew Tate until 2 or 3 years ago. And if I mentioned him to anyone, any male sort of under the age of 30, the general reaction I get is, well, of course, I don't agree with everything he says. But, I mean, he's got a point on some things.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with someone like Tate is, so Adolescence, that programme that was on recently, I mean, that was kind of sensationalising it a bit. Most people who get into the manosphere aren't going to go and murder someone. It's a bit more insidious than that. It's kind of some of these narratives about men and women's roles in society. very, very regressive version of those roles, that creeps into relationships. The ideas that people like Andrew Tate talk about, 90% of the time he'll talk about kickboxing, and then 10% he'll talk about how women's role is to stay at home. Men should not let their partner have any male friends. Men should decide what women should wear before they go out. It's kind of dripping these ideas, and we do see some of those ideas feeding through to the mainstream.
It's a miracle we've got 2 women on the panel tonight, frankly. Right, let's go to...
I just wanted to ask a question about... go on, sorry, go on. I don't know how...
We may get a question on this subject later, so if we can delay that for delayed gratification, Andrew. Let's go to Robbie in Chelmsford. Hello, Robbie.
Good evening, all. My question is, wealth taxes or welfare cuts, how would you balance Britain's books?
Well, former Labour leader Neil Kinnock has suggested a 2% tax on assets valued above £10 million. It's Green Party policy as well, saying it would raise up to £11 billion a year. Today, Keir Starmer's spokesperson repeatedly refused to rule out such a tax being introduced by the government. Alison Hume, this is being talked about a lot in Labour circles, isn't it?
Yeah, wealth tax. It's the hot topic at the moment. I think the left of the party, some of my colleagues think it's an absolutely fantastic idea and will be really buoyed by Neil Kinnock saying that. And then there's the rest of the party who think...
say the sensible party.
The rest of the party will be really quaking in their boots, because part of the problem with a wealth tax is that you're then sort of punishing the people that you want to invest in the country, and so it's a fine line to walk. I don't have a view on it. I think Rachel Reeves will.
You have to have a view.
No, I don't. No, I don't. No, I don't.
It's your job to have an opinion.
No, not on wealth.
Particularly when you come on a programme like this.
Well, not on wealth tax. I think Rachel Reeves is paid a lot more money than I am to sit and work out how to balance the books.
Look how that's going.
Now let's be kind to Rachel. She's our first female chancellor, and she's doing a fantastic job. And I think because of her budget and because of the money that she has put aside, we are seeing some really good things happening, such as I was sitting in the House today behind Bridget Phillipson. We're putting money into Send, and we're bringing back Sure Start, a new version, which is going to be fantastic for young people. So. Yeah, wealth tax.
But this has all got to be paid for, and the consensus seems to be that in the budget she's going to have to put up some taxes. So if it isn't wealth taxes, what should it be? You have to have an opinion on that, surely.
Yeah. If you were pushing me on it, Ian, which you obviously are...
Well, I'm about to, if you don't give me an answer.
Yeah, I have some sympathy for a wealth tax, because I think it's...
You just said you didn't have an opinion on it.
I have some sympathy for it, but I'm not sure it's the answer. Looking at pension funds, what do you think about that?
Well, if she wants to go down the road of Gordon Brown ruining the pensions industry in 1997, I mean...
You're not a fan, then?
I'm not a fan of any tax rises. Right. James?
I mean, it depends what wealth you're thinking of taxing in some ways. So is it going to be earned income, or is it going to be asset wealth? Because we have seen asset wealth inflate much faster than earnings over the past 20 years. So, for example, I think it was a mistake actually for Labour to bring in the national insurance rise for employers, because I think the way Labour wants to position itself is, if it is going to tax wealth more, is to put itself on the side of working people, but also on the side of small business as well. And then I think it gives them more room to go after some of the asset wealth we see in this country. Not all of it owned by British citizens. So we have a housing market in London where lots of property is brought up by, say, Russian investors in the past, and investors who just buy the property and then see the price of that inflate over years. But also there is a lot of wealth in this country that's bound up in assets, and there has been that inflationary pressure in more or less one direction over the past 3-4 decades, at the same time as earnings have been stagnating. So I think there is a moral case certainly for taxing that asset wealth over cutting benefits for disabled people. Absolutely. Andrew Gold.
Yeah, I think I don't know too much about the economy, but one thing that I do see a lot of, particularly in my sort of, what would you call it, social media sphere and that world, is people on the left saying we need a world with no billionaires. There should be no billionaires. And you never hear them say there should be no poor people. And I don't mean kill all the poor people, I mean they shouldn't be poor. So I've lived in several countries, often ones that have had historically socialist governments, and Argentina in particular, where even when they've had far-right militias as well, throughout history they have this very socialist feeling, and nothing works, everything's just terrible. And as soon as they do move towards thinking of growth, I mean, Milei's helped the economy over there a lot. So as soon as people have started to look at growth and let's all be wealthier instead of boo those bad guys at the top, let's get rid of them, countries I've seen, as I say, I don't know too much about it, but I've seen they tend to rise up.
Joe?
Yes, it's a false choice, isn't it? Punish the rich or punish the poor? Punish neither, I would say. Welfare reform is absolutely essential because the welfare bill is going up so greatly that, in a few years' time, it will be completely unaffordable regardless of who's in government. Punishing the rich. We know we've had the biggest exodus of millionaires in the last year.
The left tell us that hasn't happened.
Well, the left is wrong. The left is wrong in that. So the answer is grow the economy. And growing the economy means not bringing the national insurance rise to employers, the number of small businesses that have closed, the number of people who have lost their jobs. And Labour talk about we've created new jobs, but they don't talk about how many jobs have been lost in the last year because the cost of doing business in this country has gone up and up and up. So we have to return to some sort of enterprise economy where people can actually thrive, where wealth creators can create more wealth. And there's, creating wealth means there's enough money to pay for everything.
But why didn't we have that after 14 years of Tory government, though? I mean, poverty levels are higher today than they were 14 years ago. Why is that? Where is this wealth creation why hasn't it trickled down? I get very sick, and I think the listeners will also get sick of the 14 years of Tory government, because during those 14 years, I'm not going to give a catalogue of what was done, but nobody's saying that the state of the economy is perfect now. I mean, I sat in a parliament where the first thing we had to deal with was a global pandemic, which had a catastrophic effect on the British economy. And, the length of time it takes to recover from that is significant. But I don't think that punishing the most vulnerable or punishing wealth creators in a way that means that they look to put their assets elsewhere is the solution.
Alison, can you name me any time in our economic history where putting up taxes has increased economic growth?
No.
Can anybody? Because I can't. And yet all the economic commentators seem to suggest that is the only option available for Rachel Reeves in the next budget.
We had faster growing economy in the post-war world here than we have in the last 14 years, and we had higher taxes then. So what I'm saying, I'm not saying that the answer, therefore, is putting up taxes equals growth, but I'm saying that it's more complicated than just where taxes are necessarily.
And we've got incredibly high taxes. I mean, listeners will just feel like I do. Before I was an MP, I was a screenwriter, and it's a free.
Were you really?
It was a freelancer, and I just felt for 15 years I was treading water. No matter if I was earning well or not so well, I was never making any headway, and I think that's how most of your listeners will feel. And at least now we've got a government who've put economic growth first and foremost. We are growing
but then
the economy.
introduce policies which are the opposite of economic growth.
We had to also put the NHS back on its feet, and whether they're popular or not, we had to pay for that. It was in a dire strait. We are bringing waiting lists down. I'm not going to go into the £22 billion black hole thing again.
You just did.
I'm not going to fall into that trap, but I would say the economy was flatlining, and it's now on the up.
So can I just say the NHS, there is so much wastage in the NHS. I mean, the NHS was the
that's good because we've got rid of NHS England, so that'll save a bit.
Well, but will it? I've seen people two-pid across from one organisation to another organisation. They'll just move to another part of the NHS. But, I've just come from, it's Whistleblowers Awareness Week in Parliament, and, one of the things we talked about was waste in the NHS and the fact that some of the major trusts spend £1 billion on defending themselves against patients that have had poor treatment and payouts, and this sort of thing just shouldn't happen. So where we need to look at is not wasting public money. Because I don't think that any public body should be able to use taxpayers' money to pay off people instead of sorting out the services.
So we need a Doge, don't we? That's.
No, I think the problem is sometimes you need to spend money to save money. So if you look at something like the NHS or the asylum system, we had an era of austerity where. In the asylum system, for example, the Home Office was cut, the Border Force was cut, and now we have a huge backlog of asylum claims, which are, those asylum seekers are having to be put up in expensive hotels, which ends up costing the taxpayer more than it would if we had a system like Germany where they process them very quickly. Similarly, with the NHS, there's outsourcing to agency workers, which costs the taxpayer a lot more than an in-house employee. So staffing issues are the issue there. I think it's 1 in 5 nursing roles are not filled. And if we just if we made nursing more encouraging, if we paid for a nursing bursary again, I think that's the answer to that, rather than just saying, oh, you just cut money.
Okay, right, we have half an hour left. If you'd like to take part in our conversation, 0345 6060 973. Robbie, thank you for your question. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
The number of people who've died in flash flooding in central Texas is now 91. Authorities have warned that more heavy rain is on the way, which could complicate search and rescue efforts. Events have been taking place across London to mark 20 years since the July the 7th bombings, in which 52 people were killed and hundreds others injured. A memorial service was held at St Paul's Cathedral earlier, and wreaths have been laid at Hyde Park. And a former Conservative cabinet minister has announced he's backing Reform UK as a party that now best represents his views. David Jones, who served as Welsh Secretary under David Cameron, says he's joining Nigel Farage's party after more than 50 years as a Tory. LBC weather, a few lingering showers in eastern England tonight, mainly clear and dry for most, a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:33 on LBC. Alison Hume, Labour MP, Joe Gideon, former Conservative MP, James Bloodworth, journalist and author, and Andrew Gold, presenter of the Heretics podcast. Now, I suppose we all know what a heretic is, but I mean, it's a fascinating lineup you have on your podcast. It's once or twice a week you do a lengthy interview with somebody, which I wholly approve of. What's the point of it?
The point. Well, I had a former channel. I'm a sort of YouTube-y person somehow. I never thought that would be what I would be.
Are you an influencer?
I'm an influencer. I am. And you know, you go to school and you do those things. You fill out the things. I think he said I was going to be a farmer, which is mental. But you know, so I'm a YouTuber, whatever that is. And my former channel, I was very interested in cults and ideologies. I did most of my stuff about defectors from Scientology. I would interview them and people who have been in Nixium and other cult, and the Hasidic Jews, and all those kinds of things. But I noticed that after some time, whenever I did Islam, I was just, everyone went mad and crazy and were not happy with me, and the views were really low because people weren't happy. And trans, which I thought was part of an ideology we should at least talk about. Again, the same thing happened. So eventually I went, right, screw this. I'm making a channel from scratch. It was a bit of a risk. That is going to be almost entirely about those things and the other things we can't talk about and that the mainstream doesn't cover. Not in a conspiratorial way. We're not going into, vaccines. I've got a million vaccines. I get vaxxed every 5 seconds. I don't go for flat earth theory and all of those kinds of things, but just, the topics that I think ordinary people are really, really interested in. And you were on it very recently, and you were brilliant.
I was, but I will admit there were 1 or 2 people that said, are you sure you want to do this podcast?
And how do you feel after having done it?
I'm very glad that I did it, because you asked questions which I'm not normally asked, and I thought they were challenging questions, and I enjoyed it.
What do you think that is, people saying, are you sure you want to do this?
I think because of some of your previous guests.
Tommy Robinson.
Yeah. And
Can I ask
1
what
or
you
2
asked
others
that you didn't expect to be asked?
I can't remember now. You'll have to watch it.
Oh.
Well, that bit about the sort of, when you were running as an MP, and we talked about that, the Jewish and the Islam stuff we've just spoken about before, and then we went off on a different direction, which I thought was brilliant, that you led talking about your experiences on LBC.
Well, enough of my experiences. Let's go to another question. It's from Ryn in North Wales. You talked about defectors. Well, this is what this is about. With reform gaining traction in Wales, shouldn't Labour be offering devolution powers akin to Scotland to Wales to help save the Union? Reform is neck and neck with Plaid Cymru to win next year's elections, dethroning Labour's long-held position, which means that the Union must offer radical powers to Wales in order to keep her in the Union. Now, this is on the back of the former Conservative Welsh Secretary, David Jones, announcing this evening that he's joining Reform UK after letting his Conservative Party membership lapse in January of this year. He's also said he does not intend to stand for reform in any elections. James Bloodworth.
Yeah, I think the defection is a sign that the Conservatives are a sinking ship under Kemi Badenoch. I think it's plainly obvious to everyone that she's not up to the role. I think the Conservative Party obviously finds itself in a really difficult position after having led a government for 14 years, just like Labour did in the Parliament 2010 to 2015. So it's difficult anyway. And also it feels like the energy basically is on the kind of whatever hard right, radical right, whatever one wants to call reform, and that kind of populist insurgency. It feels like that's where the energy is on the right at the moment. It feels like with reform, I think Nigel Farage is a much better performer on some of the new video-based apps like TikTok. He's much better than Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch on those apps. He's much more charismatic, comes across. Partly, I think that's because he has less responsibility, so he can speak in a bit more of an off-the-cuff way. But as far as the right's concerned, it just feels like that's where the energy is at the moment, as opposed to the Conservative Party, where it just feels like they're not really going anywhere.
Do you think it's actually fair to call reform right? Because their economic policies seem to me to be predominantly left.
No, I think that's window dressing. That's Farage trying to make himself more presentable to the electorate. He can see the kind of number 10 in his kind of crosshairs now, and I think you'll see more of that stuff. And I think also you'll see more expulsions from Farage of people to his right. I think he's really trying to clean his act up at the moment. So I think it's mainly window dressing. I think he's the same old politician he's always been. He's just a very canny operator.
Alison.
Yeah, he is a canny operator and he's a millionaire and he draws down his pension from the European Parliament, but he's a man of the people. I'm not sure that it won't be too long before people see through that. And is it really a democratic party? No, it's something that's in his own image, and there seems to be just people coming into the party, people leaving the party. There's one of the MPs just been suspended. I mean, I can't keep up with it.
To be fair, he suspended himself.
Oh, well, there you go then. That makes it all right then. And then, of course, behind Nigel Farage is all of the councillors that have been elected across the country. There was in one county council, I think, the chief, the main guy stood down, leaving an 18-year-old in charge. I mean, is this really a sensible party?
No need to be ageist, Alison.
Well, when you're in charge of £1 million budget, I mean, okay, fair enough. But I think the point is that is it really a serious party? It's very easy to come up with numbers and shout from the sidelines. I mean, that's what he's doing at the moment.
But that's what all parties do in opposition. And, I mean, they're polling ahead of Labour and the Conservatives.
Which is astonishing, really. The architect of Brexit is... So the Brexit revolution kind of ate the soft Brexiteers. They've kind of disappeared. And the architect of what I think is probably the most disastrous policy decision since the Suez crisis is now on course, perhaps, to be Prime Minister. I mean, it's a remarkable turn of events, whatever you think of Brexit.
It absolutely is. But let's go back to what the questioner was asking about what should happen with Wales. Should Wales get more devolution powers, and so it effectively has a parliament like Scotland has? I know you represent something on the other side of the country, so I'm sure it's not uppermost in your mind. But
no. I mean, I think
devolution for Yorkshire, that's what you want, isn't it?
Yeah, I was just about to say that. I think the GDP of Yorkshire is certainly larger than Scotland, maybe not, but it's a powerhouse.
I'll tell you what, keep an eye on the text screen in front of you, because somebody's about to verify that or not. Okay, Joe.
Which bit of the question would
let's do the Wales bit first. I mean, are you, given that devolution was introduced by Labour, the Conservatives have never, apart from the initial years where they did oppose it quite loudly, it seems to have been a settled policy now. Do you think it should go further?
I think the challenge with Wales is, the population is about 2 million. You know, where do you stop devolution? 3? Yeah, I mean, it's smaller than Birmingham, isn't it? It's
no.
Well, second biggest city. So
Birmingham's 1.2.
And environs.
Okay, West Midlands, you may be right.
West Midlands.
Yeah, okay.
So at what point do we then declare Yorkshire an independent state, or Cornwall? I mean, you laugh, but it could well be that there is a growing sense of we want to have autonomy over our own patch, and I think with Wales to expand it would be problematic. I don't know. I heard recently that somebody had suggested in Wales that they would take all the Gazan refugees, that Wales would be happy to accommodate them. Now, if they had a level of autonomy that they don't currently have, that would have serious impact.
Can we take it this wasn't a member of Reform UK that suggested this?
It might well have been.
I doubt it. Andrew?
No, exactly.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, imagine that. Imagine the conflict that we would then have right on our border. And I also, all I'm hearing really is ways to get around democracy. The people of our country want a certain thing. How can we change everything so that those people don't win? Well, people are fed up with that. And also, I mean, when you guys spoke about reform, and I don't think you're wrong about everything. I mean, they obviously have their issues. But I didn't hear any curiosity as to why people are voting for them. And it seems to be a constant feeling, and this is what people think of the left and also the people in politics at the moment, is that firstly, they patronise the people and they mock them and they laugh at them and they go, oh gosh, these silly people, who would vote for these idiots, and that kind of thing. Well, these are your people, these are your constituents, and they are voting.
They're not mine, though. I'm a journalist. I don't have to make a pitch
not yours,
to the public or whatever.
But they're yours. And no, you don't. But there's still a feeling that the journalists, the media elite, it's a sneering class. These are normal people. Yeah. Their lives have been changed unbelievably. It is unrecognisable. I happen to live in a town where that has happened. Like, it really has happened. And then it is brought to life. You see that. We walk out of the street, there is nobody speaking English for...
Where's this?
Well, in Bristol.
Speaking, I'm from Somerset. I used to spend a lot of time in Bristol. Yeah. I've never been on the street.
Well, you told me before you were there 15 years ago. I said to you the demographics have changed.
Yeah, but that's
what immigration has done.
I've never been where no one's speaking English.
Why do you care? So, I mean, to me, if I hear somebody not speaking English, my first thought is, I wonder what language that is. It's not, I want this person out of my country.
Right, but what about when you see the English in loads of towns around Spain just chatting English, doing their thing, not adapting to the Spanish culture? The Spanish want them out. The Spanish are fed up, and the intellectual sneering, elitist, I'm using all the cliches here, but that side of our media, for some reason, agree with the Spanish. Bloody hell, those English abroad. But when it comes to our country, for some reason, it's not just accepted, it is celebrated. Multicultural, diversity is our strength, with no evidence at all. I don't understand.
84850.
8:49, Alison, Hume, Joe Gideon, James Bloodworth and Andrew Gold with me taking your calls. Sean is in Swindon. Hello, Sean.
Hi.
What would you like to ask?
If the panel were just Phillips, responsible for safeguarding and violence against women and girls. What would each of them do to keep our very young girls safe from these predatory grooming gangs whilst we wait for the inquiry?
Now, on a related note, it's been revealed this evening that as part of the government's employment rights reforms, employers will be banned from using non-disclosure agreements to silence workers who have been victims of harassment and discrimination. Joe, you were cheering there. Why?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I chair Whistleblowers UK, and we're absolutely against the use of non-disclosure agreements to gag people from revealing, the wrongdoings and the crimes that they see in their not just employment but public services, all organisations, and all too often they're that by signing an NDA, they not only sign away their right to speak out, but it puts them under a lifelong burden of having to sort of take that secret with them, knowing that actually speaking out would have been the right thing to do.
But what else can be done to improve safety for girls while this national statutory inquiry is going on?
Well, it's about all the people who are responsible for safeguarding stepping up. So, when we look at the Rochdale and Rotherham and, all these rape grooming gangs, the schools were aware that these men were sort of hovering around at the school gates. A lot of them were taxi drivers. It wasn't done. It was done in plain sight, basically. And when things were reported, they weren't followed up on. People chose not to notice and not to treat them as victims. They treated them. I mean, what you're talking about is the police. Well, it's the police, the social services, and schools. Anybody who sees that, who witnesses that. I think ordinary members of the public, if you see a 13-year-old girl being plied with vodka by, somebody who's 3 times their age and being driven around in taxis, that surely has to raise alarm bells. So there has to be a mechanism. Everybody has to feel responsible for what happened to those girls, not just the people who were directly responsible, but anybody who turned a blind eye.
Alison.
I think, as a mother, I've got 2 daughters, and bringing them up in the modern world was actually terrifying. And, I just think it must have been so much easier for previous generations to bring up girls without the pressure of social media. And I think keeping girls safe, there's a lot to be said for protecting them from being groomed and abused online. That's part of the issue. And I think from what Joe said, it is about people who have responsibility for safety of young people, teachers, police and social services talking to each other. And I think really there's been a lack of confidence recently in the police and for women and girls. I mean, rape has been virtually decriminalised over, the previous years, and we've got a pledge to halve violence against women and girls over the next 10 years, and that's going to be a big thing if we do that. So I think trust in the police, that police have got to reform themselves so that women and girls can trust them to look after them. That would be the first step. Is
it just an attitudinal thing, though, or is it the fact that, and we've heard this a lot, that part of the reason why some of the police forces didn't pursue this is because they thought they'd be accused of being racist if they didn't?
Yeah.
If they did.
Yeah, and I think that conversation has now been exposed, and Dame Louise Casey, she's put that out there, and that's why we're having the review. And colleagues of mine, Sarah Champion, and other people were saying that, and they were shouted down for saying it, and but they were right.
James.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the grooming gang specifically, there can't be any of the equivocation that we saw in some of those cases where the authorities essentially backed off because of what they would call cultural sensitivities and the like. I think when we talk about integration, and I do think I am a supporter of multiculturalism, but when we talk about that and integration, we also have to have a universal standard, and we also have to exert our own values that women are equal members of society alongside men, and we don't view them as second-class citizens as some more backwards cultures in the world unfortunately do. But I would also say that misogyny, as I've discovered in my book, is not just a problem confined to certain religious or ethnic communities. It's something that some attitudes, misogynistic attitudes we see from influencers like Andrew Tate, have become more popular, and that's in an insidious way. That stuff is creeping into men and women's relationships.
Well, just on that, let's add this into the mix. Josephine says, how much to blame are the manosphere influencers and podcasters for young girls in this country being unsafe? Andrew?
That's mad. I want to ask James first, what backwards cultures were you talking about?
I mean, tribal cultures from parts of Pakistan, elements of Islam, interpretations of Islam. But again, I wouldn't say it's just that. I mean, we can look at the Catholic Church as well and say that women and boys have been horribly abused by that, but then I wouldn't go around blaming that on individual Catholics. So I think it's complicated, but I think it's the authorities have a duty to treat everyone as equal under the law and to pursue complaints regardless of so-called cultural sensitivities.
Can I just say about the manosphere? Sorry.
I want to hear from Andrew first.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Well, this was this whole thing around adolescence, this idea. I mean, and I do get that there are issues with the whole manosphere thing, but we have to think, I mean, why did Andrew Tate convert to Islam? Why do you think he did that?
Opportunistically
yes.
But it's the same way. Why does he say stuff about Palestine? Like, obviously he doesn't care about that.
No, sure, but it's opportunistic. So why was that an opportunity? Why was that a financial gain, which obviously we know that's what Tate is interested in, converting to Islam?
I mean, it's a grift as far as I'm concerned. He's said lots of absurd things.
But why would Islamists or people of the Islamic faith?
No one
who would that appeal
really
to?
Converted to Islam, though.
That would not appeal to just English, white, whatever people, would it? That would not appeal to them that he's converted to Islam.
But why would say Andrew Tate be a representative of Islam more than say Mo Salah? I think why Andrew Tate? Why not Mo Salah?
No, that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is why would he, as a commercial decision, convert to Islam? And I think we know the answer, because it's far more popular and pervasive, those kinds of views in Islam. Now, we also see them in the Hasidic Jews, as I say. We also see them in Hinduism. If we need to say those, if I have to constantly qualify things so that people go, oh, phew, he's not a racist, he's saying it about all the cults and all the religions, fine. But this is one that has millions and millions of people in this country. There's tens of thousands of Hasidic Jews here. If there were millions of them, I would be saying, gosh, we have an Andrew Tate problem, because Andrew Tate would have converted to Hasidic Judaism, wouldn't he? He's converted to Islam. So we can't keep saying, like, we're still doing it.
But Andrew Tate's appeal isn't predominantly to Muslims. It's so 80% of 13 to 15-year-old boys have heard of Andrew Tate, and a quarter have a positive view of him. And that's mostly kind of white English boys. It's a broad spread, basically.
Right, we're running out of time. I'm going to hear from Alison.
Yeah, thank you. If I just come in quickly, I think it was Josephine asked this question by text, and we haven't mentioned it, and I hope I'm all right to mention this but there is a point about the manosphere and girls feeling unsafe and Andrew Tate. We've not mentioned the horrific rise of pornography. Let's not forget that these poor girls, these victims, were just used by men as sexual objects. So the rise in pornography online and Andrew Tate talking about women and girls as just objects to be used as property is part of it, and it is used by influencers and podcasters.
The lesson from all of this, that you've even said this, the lesson was to stop worrying about being called racist for criticising a belief system. And that was the lesson from the grooming gang situation. We've just been asked a question about grooming gangs, and we've all managed to flip it over to the far right. Look how easily that happened. That's what was happening in the police for years, and it's happening right in front of our eyes again. When will we learn from history? Name it for what it is. And fine, if you want to call the other religions out, fine. I'm a secular person myself, an atheist. Far-right fundamentalist religions do not have a space in our policy and in our country. I mean, they can be here in our country, but they cannot be changing our laws to suit their, as you said, backwards ideologies.
Shall we lighten the mood a bit?
Never.
Let's go to a fun question from Alex in Didcot. With Britain going Oasis crazy over the weekend, can't say I'd noticed, but anyway, who would you happily pay over the odds to see, whether it's a musician, sports person, or even a public speaker, living or dead? James?
Back in 2010, I met Christopher Hitchens, and I was kind of young and a bit shy, and I had a conversation with him, and it was an incredibly interesting evening. And I kind of would pay to hear him speak and give his take on current events if that were possible. Obviously,
I can provide you with Peter Hitchens, but not Christopher.
Peter, I spoke to Peter before. He's a nice fellow, but no,
he
not
comes
quite.
on this programme occasionally too. Alison.
Yeah, Oasis crazy, Black Sabbath crazy. I love music. I think I would like to see Janis Joplin live, preferably at Woodstock.
Wow, Joe.
So I love dance. I would have loved to have seen Rudolf Nureyev dancing. And so I'd have to resurrect him, obviously, to see him live rather than on television.
Andrew?
I'd love to hang out with Tom York and the rest of Radiohead and just watch them do their thing and just fall asleep watching them do their thing.
You're so cool. Said no one.
Hang on, that's not that alternative, is it? It's quite one of the biggest bands in the world, I guess.
Thank you all very much indeed for coming on the programme tonight. If you missed any of tonight's show, you can catch up on the podcast or on Global Player or the LBC YouTube channel. Now, on tomorrow's panel, we have the Labour MP Gregor Poynton, Independent peer Baroness Claire Fox, former Tory MP and birth trauma campaigner Theo Clark, and the philosopher Dr. Jack Symes. I was actually hoping to get Jack Symes on with you, Andrew, because I think you'd have probably had quite an interesting discussion. But you and James did quite well at slugging it out.
Oh, I love James. He's been on my podcast as well.
Have you?
Yeah, we had a great time.
Before I knew Tommy Robinson was on the
Oh, well, there you go. Right, in the next hour, remember all of those phone-ins we used to do about parents pulling their kids out of school to go on holiday during term time and then being fined for it? Well, apparently the prospect of a fine is not putting parents off taking their children out of the classroom for holidays to beat high prices. There's a report out today that says a third of parents would remove their children from school in term time to take them on holiday. I'm wondering if this isn't working, is it time for this law to be abolished? I was never in favour of it in the first place. I think if a parent decides that a child should miss a few days of school to go on holiday because they can't afford to go when everybody else goes, fair dues. What do you think? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the number of people killed in flash flooding in central Texas has risen to at least 91 people. A Christian summer camp for girls